with.
Now stop that. No, but it says it in the Bible. You know,
Mhm.
if you care about that sort of thing, I mean, obviously I do,
Yeah,
but
I study the Bible and at Jesuit schools, and I forgot half of it. Binge drinking.
I forgot a third of it, but just the adjectives. I remember the nouns and the
Yeah,
verbs.
there's a lot of begats. People begat people. It was disgusting. Don't begat kids. Just remember that. Do not begat anything.
I'm resident of Colin for you too, Joel says. Joined by the author of The Dark Shadows Daybook, my buddy Patrick McCray, and joined by my buddy Gordon Dymowski. We're here to talk about the Phoenix, or more importantly, we're here to talk about Masters of Disguise, characters who pose as somebody they really weren't.
I
And
just want to say, Master of Disguise was a terrible movie. Dana Carvey should not have done that script. Let's just end that right there. No,
His
no more Master of
finest,
Disguise conversation. Let's move on.
his finest hour.
I'll tell you, a really good movie is Brain Scan. Anyway, uh, we're
Means
not we're not here to discuss either one of those. Okay, so here's my point to you guys, and I do have something to read to you guys as well.
good.
But before I do read something, I want to get you guys' thoughts. But here's my point. Here's Dana Malay playing a character who's called Laura Collins. Everybody confirms she's Laura Collins. Roger confirms she's Laura Collins. They give her a memory test. She not only sounds like Laura, she looks like Laura. She has all of Laura's memories, including those with David, even the time they lived together. I mean, everything Laura needs to have, this woman, or she needs every memory of Laura she needs to have, she has. She has everything. This woman is literally posing as Laura Collins, though she is not. So before I read something, I want to get you guys' thoughts on that because I feel Dark Shadows is taking from the shadow here. Or borrowing, I'll say.
Okay.
Well, here's a question I have, and I'm going across kind of a fuzzy memory of the Laura arc. Was it ever established there was a real Laura Collins for this person to impersonate, or
Yes.
was it established that this that the Phoenix has always manifested herself as a person named Laura Collins?
There
I
was
think
a
that needs to be.
there was a Laura Collins in Phoenix, Arizona that are because remember her apartment catches fire and the fake Laura Collins says, well, that was just that must have been someone else in my part. There's
Yeah,
it's they determined that the woman was Laura who burned to death, but that's impossible because Laura's in Collinsport. It can't be there. They say it's a mistaken identity. The Collins family and Laura say, well, you're mistaken. They pass it off as that, but they're not. And then the body completely the what's left of it completely decomposes, like goes up in ashes. So there is an actual Laura Collins that this woman is impersonating and has all her memories. Now they do change this obviously when they get to 1897, but I'm more sticking to the initial Phoenix arc for this point.
Excellent.
So, Patrick, any thoughts before I read something to sort of
Well, there's Laura Collins, and she's a master of disguise.
here's what I wanted to read to you guys, and I hope you bear with me. So this is what I mean by here's a woman who's posing as something she's not. When Walter Gibson wrote The Shadow, he hinted that Lamont Cranston was the Shadow. In chapter 7 of The Shadow Laughs, we learned the truth. So, oh, where did it go? Oh, goodness. Okay. 1 second, guys. Okay, chapter 7. Lamont Cranston talks to himself 4 o'clock in the morning. That was the time indicated by the luminous dial of the wristwatch, as Lamont Cranston studied it in the darkness. He had awakened suddenly, and he could not account for it. Usually a sound sleeper, he had been strangely aroused from a fantastic dream. The room was pitch black. Slumber seemed gone from the millionaire's mind. He listened intently. He fancied that he had heard a soft whispering voice calling his name. Yet it must have been a dream. Then his muscles tightened. Lamont Cranston. The summons came in an almost inaudible tone from the foot of the bed. It was a whisper, a strange, invisible whisper. Incredible. This was no dream. It was reality. The millionaire slipped his right hand under his pillow and grasped his automatic. Quietly, he pointed it toward the foot of the bed. Then he pushed his body upward, and with his free hand he pulled the cord of the reading lamp. A figure was standing at the foot of the bed, a black figure that seemed like a huge shadow. Cranston's eyes made out a form clad in black, its face hidden by a hat with a turned-down brim. The millionaire covered the figure with his revolver. Then he spoke hoarsely. "Who are you? Raise your hands or I shall fire." A soft, low laugh came from the foot of the bed. "Press the trigger," came the whispered voice. The millionaire obeyed. A click answered. The gun had been loaded when he had placed it beneath his pillow. Now it was empty. "Do not be alarmed," came the whispered voice. Its tone was sinister despite its assurance. "You need not fear. I shall not harm you. I unloaded your automatic. I thought you might become excited." "Who are you?" demanded Lamont Cranston. The figure ignored his question. "I have come to advise you," came the whisper. "You must leave here for a while, for a month at least. I recommend a trip to Europe. Sea air is very healthy at this season. You will go tomorrow. Who are you?" Again, the question was ignored. "Will you obey my orders?" asked the voice from the foot of the bed. "No," exclaimed the millionaire. The figure laughed mirthlessly, and Lamont Cranston shuddered. His eyes gazed in fascination as the man in black moved from his position and came to the side of the bed until he stood but a few feet away. The millionaire changed his position in readiness for an attack. "You asked me who I am," said the strange being. "Tell me first, who are you?" "You know my name," replied the millionaire. "You called it Lamont Cranston." A mocking laugh was the response. "I called your name?" was the figure's question. I must disagree with you. I called my own name." The black form removed slightly. The cloak and the hat dropped backward and disappeared. A man was revealed in the light, and startled cry escaped Lamont Cranston's lips. The person who stood before him was the very double of himself. "I am Lamont Cranston," announced the stranger. The millionaire shuddered as he heard his own voice uttered by those lips. My point being of reading that is, and I didn't read all of it, but the shadow was telling Lamont Cranston he has his voice, he has his look, he has his signature, he knows his bank accounts, he knows his relatives' names. He knows everything about him, more about Lamont Cranston than Lamont Cranston knows about himself. I really think, and look, we know that the writers of Dark Shadows are going to sort of use, Marvel, DC inspirations, but I think long before they did, they used pulp inspirations, especially from The Shadow. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's some evidence to that. And that's something I'm not knocking them. I think it's genius what they do here. The Phoenix, you take a great actress like Dana Malay, you have her play a character who appears out of nowhere. She's just sitting in she's sitting in the where Maggie Evans works. Sam Evans looks at her like he recognizes her, and even Sam tells Roger, "Guess who's back in town? Guess."
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, is saying that this is Laura Collins, that this woman he sees is Laura Collins. And again, it all gets reconfirmed back that yes,
I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm the body.
good point.
You know, go ahead. What do you?
I think we lost you there, Jewel. No, seriously, the signal cut out. Could you repeat your thesis?
Well, in the Shadow Laughs, in part 7 of the Shadow Laughs, Lamont Cranston talks to himself is the name of the chapter. So you have a moment where the shadow appears in Lamont Cranston's bedroom, and he's at the foot of the bed, and Lamont Cranston grabs his revolver, he points it, and he says, who's there? Who are you? He hears his name. By the way, the shadow calls Lamont Cranston's name, and he goes, I'll fire, and the shadow says, press the trigger. The point being is, the shadow comes to his bedside, and he goes, you asked me who I am. Who are you? And Lamont Cranston goes, well, you know my name. You called it. He goes, I did. I beg to differ. I called my own name. And he pulls back the black cloak and hat, and standing there is a very double look-alike sound.
Joel?
We lost you again.
He knows he knows more about Lamont Cranston than Lamont Cranston does, which is interesting. You know, I think again, we know that the Dark Shadows writers are going to borrow from Marvel and DC a bit, but I think long before that happened, where they really borrowed from, especially for the Phoenix arc, was the Shadow. Because here's the Shadow, who's not really Lamont Cranston, but he poses as him. And this is not the first character the Shadow has posed as, but this character is going to become as important as everyone else because it helps the Shadow along with his journey and his adventures. Now, the difference, there's obviously clear differences between the Phoenix and the Shadow. The Phoenix is here to claim a child. She's not looking to recruit, agents or anything like that. Here's this woman who's posing as Laura Collins. She looks like Laura. She sounds like Laura. And even Sam Evans himself, when he sees Laura Collins, he sees Laura where his daughter's working. And he recognizes her by look alone. And he tells Roger, guess who I saw? Guess who I saw? I saw your wife. I saw Laura. So everybody recognizes her as such, as Laura Collins, but she's not really Laura Collins. This is why my thesis is the Dark Shadows borrowed from the Shadow. It borrowed from the pulp. Go ahead. You guys got it.
I'm not as familiar with the pulps. I'm somewhat familiar. Doc Savage, certainly. But Gordon knows far more about this than I do.
Okay. Sir, this is Pornhub. No, let me preface this by saying that years ago, I was fortunate enough to work on some pulp reissues with a man named John Olson, who is one of the biggest experts on the Shadow. I mean, probably second to Will Murray, who actually has 2 books out about the history of the Shadow, which I'll go into later. But the way that the Shadow and Lamont Cranston's relationship kind of develops is that it's not so much it's pointed out very specifically. So the Shadow does have some other people that he pretends to be, but he basically poses as Lamont Cranston. So it would be like if Patrick and I looked anything alike. Lamont Cranston was like a big adventurer. He'd go to the jungle. He'd be in Europe. So basically, the Shadow would just pretend to be Lamont Cranston, because there are actually a couple of pulps, like Joe pointed out one. There's one called The Three Shadows, where it's basically the Shadow and Lamont Cranston against an imposter shadow. Because Gibson's forte was misdirection, and but everyone really knows that the shadow is really Kent Allard, who was an aviator who crashed in, I think, the Andes, who kind of had to, that's where he learned to like do his all powers of hypnosis stuff. It's in the pulps. Walter Gibson wrote it, so it's canon. I think in this case, I'm not sure I would call Laura Collins a master of disguise. What I think it may be, just based on the actual, what we see in the show, is I think that the Phoenix is more of an abstract. It's, the traditional mythology is it's a bird, but I think it's more of I'm not sure it has a form we would recognize. And I think what it might have done is, in order to have some kind of corporeal form, borrowed something from Laura Collins before she died. So essentially, I think, to put it simply, a magic clone, where she has the memories, she has the Phoenix powers, she just doesn't have, she's just not the original Laura. Because don't forget, in 1796, you have the Laura who married Jeremiah. In 1897, you have the Laura who comes in and who kind of ran off with Quentin. So I think my personal theory, and just based on conjecture from what happened, is it may be that this Laura Collins, that the Phoenix is an entity that is somehow able to take another person and manifest itself to look like that person, memories and everything. So that's why you can have, say, the burnt corpse of Laura Collins and the Phoenix Laura Collins. I don't think it's not like Angelique, who puts on a dark wig and go, "Hey, I'm Cassandra, I'm married to Roger." And no, it's not that kind of disguise. I think it's a magical entity that's taken on the guise of Laura Collins, and it doesn't really have an identity of its own. Whereas a master of disguise, usually they know who they are, but they're posing to be someone else. I mean, it's being pedantic, but it's kind of where I kind of see the character. And again, it's an opinion. It's not set in stone.
Well, the Phoenix knows who she is. She's not Laura Collins. She's Stockridge or something like that. With this, what's the most unclear thing about the Phoenix arc for me, when you're initially introduced to this, is whether or not Laura Collins, the real Laura Collins, cooperated with this whole thing. Now, I don't think she did, because, did this woman ever want to see her son again? I'd like to think she did, but I'd also like to think she didn't agree with a fire demon that, oh yeah, I'll give you my body and memory so I can, perhaps see my son.
Well, I never said that it was willing. I just said
no. I'm not saying you did. I'm more going off of my biggest question.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if. What I'm meaning is, I'm not sure myself if Laura herself, the Laura Collins in Phoenix, Arizona, pun intended, that's where she is. But if the Laura Collins, David's real mother, in Phoenix, Arizona, I don't know if she, again, I'm more asking you guys, do you guys think she agreed willingly to cooperate with this demon from hell, so to speak?
I think she is the demon from hell. That's my opinion, is that it's the same entity that just keeps showing up again and again. I think that the Laura Collins of 1966 is the same entity who just keeps getting regenerated, every sort of every 100 years.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a personal theory about why she came back 30 years too early. I wonder if this particular entity is somehow dying. And so every time she does this cycle, she loses a little bit more energy, life. So she's like, okay, I need to get this done more quickly because that way, once I get my son, then I can have, that somehow there's a sense of urgency about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do think they say in this, like during this arc, that she's trying to get David to cooperate with her a lot quicker. A bit. It might be this or 1897. I'm not too sure. With this, though, I do feel a bit that they're borrowing from the Shadow in a sense. Because, like you have a woman who, again, I know it's we all know it's an actress, Dana Malay, but she looks like Laura. She sounds like Laura. She has all of Laura's memories. Well, here's sort of my question. Do you guys think that Laura cooperated with the Phoenix here? She wanted to see her son so bad.
I think she is the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's my theory.
Yeah, I think, I think if, my main theory is that Laura is the Phoenix. It's just the one that's the most sense. If you're going to establish that she's a someone in disguise, I think it's more of a. It may just be that the Phoenix somehow latches onto the nearest blonde that happens to look like Diana Malay, and becomes that person, with the person ending up dying, so that it's like, because they need to have some kind of corporeal form. Yeah, I don't think it's a case of like the demon said, "Hey, Laura, would you let me use your face?" Because Laura's like, "No, go to hell. No, what? No." If you wanna go steal David, go deal with Roger. He'll scare you by crushing a brandy snifter in his hand.
When she takes the body of Laura and they're investigating this, she has all of Laura's memories. This is sort of where Victoria taunts her 100 years, or sorry, burned alive. So I do like what they do here. I love the Phoenix and how they bring it together. I look at her like, here's this woman, and she says this too when she's getting ready to try to like take David away. When the shack's on fire, she goes, "Oh, come on, Victoria," because Victoria says, "Why, Mrs. Collins? Why?" And she goes, she corrects her like, "No, I'm not Mrs. Collins. I'm not Laura Collins." This is sort of the biggest reveal of the Phoenix, that she's Stockridge or something. And so that reveal was like, okay, she knew who she was, but yet she posed as this other woman who, again, took this woman's body, took her memories, and everybody thought it was her. The only person who knew it wasn't first was a ghost, Josette. And Josette does everything. Josette uses the living to sort of help fight her battle. She uses Sam Evans. She uses Victoria Winters. Once she realizes, okay, I can't do this by myself. I need assistance. I need to get help, and to fight this demon from hell, if you will. Elizabeth is the first real person to stand up to her, and she pays for it, not knowing what she really is, which I love. What did you guys think of Elizabeth? Because Joan Bennett's character Elizabeth is going to get put in the hospital. How shocked were you when you first saw that?
I mean, I was surprised. It was nice to see Elizabeth taking a more proactive role, definitely. And it makes sense that as one of the key mortals, that she would that she would pay the price. That she's not designed for supernatural combat.
And it's also good because for so long she'd been the woman in the house who never dealt outside. So it's nice to see her getting a little bit more of a backbone. And also when you consider that Joan Bennett was in a lot of like noir and that kind of harder edge films, things like Scarlet Street, it's nice to give her something that kind of fits her traditional movie persona.
Yeah. I was shocked because we had not seen Joan Bennett really, her Elizabeth, especially her character Elizabeth, really put under intense danger like this. I mean, you could say Matthew Morgan, but Matthew would never hurt Elizabeth.
Well, that was the point.
Right, with this, she gets hurt. She gets put into a hospital, into a comatose state. And I love the fact that they do this because it gives Carolyn, it gives Nancy Barrett more of a spotlight. You get Victoria with more of a spotlight, Roger with more of a spotlight. You know, obviously we know Dana Malay is going to be your main heel here, but everybody else gets to step up. Why Joan Bennett sort of has to, you know, she's not off the show, but her character's somewhat written off to a degree.
Well, I think it may be a couple of things. It may be that at one point, Joan Bennett was complaining, may have said to producers, you know, oh, you have me walking around and saying regal things and wearing dresses, and I'm kind of bored. I want a challenge. And they said, okay, hey, you want a temporary vacation from the show? In fact, the episodes you're in, you can just take a nap on set. And she's like, oh dear, I can do that. So that's one thing. Yeah. I also think at this point, the show is they're doing a test run for how deep can we go into the supernatural. Yeah. And it's not quite, I wouldn't call it a rough draft for Barnabas. It's more like they're trying to figure out, how do we do this? You know, how do we really, if we're going to, you know, they're dipping their toes into what Dark Shadows would become. So I think it's a little bit more. So I think they're figuring out, okay, how do we operate, you know, can we have one of our main characters out of the action for a significant time and do something that's a little different than, because Joan Bennett was, you know, she wasn't maybe an A+ movie star, but she had a reputation for being a movie star. So you remove that person out, you know, the person who you hire just to get ratings. Then that forces you to go, okay, how do we do this? Okay, let's emphasize on Carolyn. Let's emphasize this. And because the Phoenix is not vampires you got a ton of lore on them, a ton of like history and movies and cultural references. The Phoenix is kind of like except for I think it is part of Egyptian mythology, but there's no cultural emphasis to it. So they could get away with doing that. So I think what the writers were trying to do is basically figure, okay, if we're going to go into the supernatural, let's see how this works. And what we know is that because of this, the ratings started to decline. We're still on their upward climb. So I think it's Dark Shadows approaching what will happen in 212. It's heading towards that piece. I mean, it's not perfect, but no arc on Dark Shadows is perfect.
Patrick?
Yes. Joel, what is the central question I can address here? Because a lot of stuff has been talked about, and although this is a section of the series I've seen several times, I'm not as knowledgeable of it as other sections of the series. So what can I opine on specifically for you here?
Okay, here's my question for you guys with because you get some character introduction to this, not just Laura, but you do get a battle between a ghost and another entity. Gordon talked about that they're testing the waters, and I do agree here, because one of the best interactions you see Josette in the cottage, the ghost of Josette, and you see Dana Malay's Laura Collins say, "No, Josette, he's mine." So now you're getting supernatural versus supernatural. What did you think about that?
I thought it was great. It was high time for the show to go there and do that. And I can't recall, you know, other than, you know, like House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and, you know, Abbott and Costello, Frankenstein, things like that. A lot of kind of supernatural on supernatural, you know, conflict. And I think that that really set a precedent for what the series would do much later on, where, when you come back from, well, really when you go to 1795, because when you go to 1795, you basically have, a vampire and a witch going at it. And I don't know if they would have had the guts to do something like that if it hadn't been for this storyline.
Here's another question for you guys. You also get the introduction of Dr. Peter Guthrie. What did you guys think of him?
He's a great character, and it's high time, and that really starts to expand the DSU. That really establishes that this is a world, even though Vicky hasn't had contact with that section of it as robustly as she will. But this is a world where the supernatural is a thing that needs to be taken seriously. And more importantly, humans have a place at the table for addressing it and battling it, rather than just being victims of it. And I liked that a great deal. One of the things I think Dark Shadows needs credit for is how many things that we take for granted in supernatural TV, they invented. There's a lot of vampire lore, but it's all kind of, folklore and so on. None of that had really been codified when Dark Shadows happened. And vampire lore would borrow a lot, but then it would also do its own thing. Vampire lore became intensely dynastic, and Dark Shadows isn't. The character I like in Barnabas the most is Ralph Hinckley in Greatest American Hero. A guy who gets these powers but has no one to show him really how to use them.
Yeah. Gordon?
I have to agree. I think Guthrie is a good character, and I think what you're seeing here is that Collinwood is no longer one of those kind of. It starts to have a sense of history and a sense of, it's more than just the Blue Whale. It's more than just kind of generic soap opera town. You get a sense that it's starting. This is the start of the Dark Shadows cinematic universe. And I'm happy to say the Zack Snyder film is coming out next year on Netflix.
Oh, boy. Imagine Zack Snyder doing the Penn storyline. The Snyder Cut.
Well, at least it's not anybody. At least it's not Harvey Weinstein. I mean, what? Anyway, no, Guthrie's introduction is, to me, just as important as Diana Malay's The Phoenix, and both are great compliments to one another. When I look at Dr. Peter Guthrie and the way he was played, and I look at Dr. Julie Hoffman, they're two completely different characters. You have Guthrie, who more arrives as a neutral party. He's just investigating it casually. He doesn't take one side or the other. Yeah, he's there to find out what happened, but he doesn't go pointing fingers, which is really interesting. This is really a polar opposite of Burke Devlin as well, who we know how Burke came into Dark Shadows, and he's ready to do crusades with the Collins family.
Yeah.
And here's Dr. Guthrie, who is investigating, an alleged entity. And what does he want? Proof. I'm not just going to point fingers at this woman and say, oh yeah, no, he doesn't do that. And that's something I really appreciate, because you guys are right with here's this mortal who's handling this with not necessarily kid gloves, but discreet enough gloves. He doesn't make himself a threat right away. He's trying to find out the truth of what's really going on here and who's really doing it. And I think I appreciate him all that much more.
Yeah, he is the typical occult detective. Yeah. He's the guy who comes in and deals with a case. Maybe the solution is supernatural. Maybe it's scientific and rational. But the detective never makes the assumption that, oh, okay, it's a ghost. It's not like the guy on that one show is like that one meme of, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. Guthrie is not the kind of guy to say I'm not saying it's ghosts, but it's ghosts.
Yeah, he's really a great character. One of the most underrated in Dark Shadows history. Really just cool.
It would have been a fun series if he had continued in it.
Yeah.
That would have been the. So okay, we have another entry in the Dark Shadows cinematic universe.
I love how they mention him during the Barnabas Collins arc. Actually, they mention him and Laura. So, with this, what's you guys' favorite scene from the Phoenix arc?
I don't know. Gordon, what do you think?
I would say that the scene where it's the final, it's like Laurel's final scene where she and David are in the fire, and she wants him to come to him, and he's freaking out, mostly because in stories like this, there's usually the mother, the parent who wants their child, and then there's usually a test of, is this person really care enough about their child to let them go or to wish them harm? And it doesn't go in that direction. It's just kind of like, it is scary. And you can understand why David turns from kind of problem child pre-Barnabas to kind of kid who sees ghosts a lot post-Barnabas. Because something like that, when you're not only up against the supernatural, but you're up against your own mother. And I also suspect that because of that, he is marked. That there's, he's got a big target on his back. It's like, you could see not Count Patofi, Judas Zachary, because he's kind of an impulsive twerp. Like, okay, I need to get back at them. I'll send an imaginary Quentin Collins ghost at him, and it's like, oh, that didn't work. Now they brought Quentin. Okay, I'll send Gerard. Oh, okay. Well, they're sending Kate Jackson at him, and it's like, oh my God, yeah. Now I'm going to go back and be scary, and it's like, Zachary gets shot by Desmond in a lucky shot. But we all know that. But I think that scene, it's kind of I think it's a very emotional. It's one of the emotional linchpins, because I think what it does is it changes David from kind of the plucky youngster to more of a Will Robinson type character, where he is part of the action versus it's the, hey, look, he's cute.
Yeah, the action isn't necessarily kind of happening to him off screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't pull back from engaging with him as a kid. In fact, his being threatened is central.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of scenes I enjoyed. I really enjoyed Sam Evans kept painting Laura Collins, and then he gets his hand burned by Laura Collins. Peter Guthry's death is one of the most gut-punching moments in this series, and it's done so well. Really, really great job. And we get our first seance is done during the Phoenix arc, which I love. It's really cool. We get a seance to talk to the ghost of Josette. Victoria gets to speak French. Really, really, really good.
I loved how when Jewel is talking, the cat just puts his best side forward to the camera. I love that.
Is that Lincoln?
Yes.
Lincoln. Cute cat. But just a really good fun arc. Is there anything you guys want to add about this discussion here?
No, I think he's an interesting take. Who are the other masters of disguise that you see?
Barnabas, who's rarely he's posing as a descendant, but one of my favorites is Cassandra. I really fit because Cassandra. I want to get into. So, who do you guys want to do first? Do you want to do Barnabas or Cassandra?
Oh, I think let's hang back on Barnabas. I'll tell you why. The audience, at least for a bit, the audience is in on Barnabas's secret identity almost immediately. Yep. In fact, thanks to the monologue that we saw in the episode yesterday, we have no doubt who he is. I think the better masters of disguise are where the audience has a few doubts also.
Also, there's Alexis and Count Patofe. Count Patofe does not show up as Count Patofe. Yeah, that's right. He poses as somebody else.
Yeah, but you know who the best master of disguise is?
Yeah.
Harry Johnson.
Yeah.
Because he's a hack pretending to be a decent actor.
Oh, no.
As a wise man once said, Craig Slocum rather than none.
That's true. Yeah. Now, Craig Slocum has some very dedicated fans. And, I would be curious to hear what they like most about him.
Well, they're all his cousins, so they kind of have to be nice.
No, I am. I'm genuinely curious because there is something about Craig as an actor that is watchable, that's interesting. I mean, we keep talking about him. Craig Slocum had the misfortune of playing kind of simps. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that was entirely fair to him. I mean, not that it's the producer's job to be fair to an actor, I mean, you know what's fair? You say lines, you get paid. Okay, that's fair. I mean, it's I don't think, Ron Sproat is going into Dan's office saying, you know what, this just hasn't been right for Craig. Craig needs to play a hero also. The people on the street may think he's actually Noah Gifford. He's actually like that. And we can't have that. No, I mean, nobody talks about that sort of thing. Nevertheless, it'd be interesting to see what else his range had.
For every Macho Man Randy Savage, there needs to be a Brooklyn Brawler. And Craig Slocum is your Brooklyn Brawler.
I would love to see Macho Man Randy Savage wrestling Craig Slocum. I imagine Craig in the traditional wrestling singlet, but with like long boxers and a long sleeve, long underwear shirt under the singlet, kind of sticking out.
Yep, and Craig will make the mistake of, Macho Man will be like, "Hey, let's snap into a Slim Jim," and Craig's like, "No, thank you, jerky's not for me."
Here's the thing: when you get cast in a role, not every role is going to be big. We know this. I mean, but are there things they could have had, Harry Johnson do? Sure. I mean, he becomes people's lackey, and he's his character who's been in prison, who's been in trouble. It had some potential, but it didn't go too far.
Yeah, and also too, I mean, the show did have to have a soap opera element for a while, so it's kind of figuring out, okay, there's no, Dark Shadows was doing a lot. I mean, it's also the first soap opera produced in color. They're doing a lot of technical stuff that probably, I mean, I was reading somewhere they only had like $70,000 a week to produce 5 episodes.
Unbelievable. No wonder the cast sizes were so small, per episode.
And they weren't even in they weren't in like the main ABC studio. They were in another studio, which is essentially like, now they're condos, but it's, it was very much very grassroots television.
Yeah.
First of all, guys, thank you so much for humoring me with this episode.
Absolutely.
So sorry for the delay. I have some things to take care of. Is 11 o'clock good for tomorrow night, guys? For Cassandra?
I'm gonna have to bow out for a few days. I have some personal matters that I need to attend to. So
Jewel, that's up to, I mean, we can, wait for that. We can talk about something else if you like, but or we can take
here's something we could discuss on Dark Shadows. Let's discuss some special effects tomorrow night. How's that?
I think that's great. I'd be happy to chat about that.
Okay, so
chroma key. No, that's what it is. It's chroma key was their major special effect.
No, I'm just
and someone going crazy with the vision mixer.
Yeah. So tomorrow, me and Patrick McCray are going to discuss the special effects. Gordon, I can't wait to come back, buddy. Take care, obviously. Godspeed. Links to Dark Shadows Daybook Code Battle is going to be in the description box. Link to Gordon Dymowski's Amazon page is going to be in the description. Remember, Friday night, Patrick, Jaws. Jaws.
Right there. All right.
You guys have a good night.
It won't be a boating accident.
No.
Good night, all.
Good night.